Welcome everyone. I'm Elizabeth Capp. I'm the head of campus here at Trobe Shepparton, and it's my absolute delight to welcome you all here. It's been a long time between drinks, I think we can all agree, and it's just so gorgeous to have a room full of people here to listen to a wonderful speaker and to catch up and think about some really important and interesting issues for all of us. The very first thing I get to do, which is even more delightful, is welcome Auntie Faye, who is going to welcome us to country. Thank you, Auntie Faye.
That's good, darling, for us short people. Good evening, everybody. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, where we're meeting on today, the Yorta Yorta Nations. I'm a very proud Yorta Yorta woman, elders past and present, and the emerging. Like my granddaughter, she drives me everywhere, my chauffeur, my beautiful granddaughter. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here. And whatever culture's out there, I welcome you all in. And we are one. And if we're not one, this world wouldn't rotate around, because we are, and we enjoy everything about it together. Because it's history, it's my culture, but it's history of Australia. Your history and my history. So welcome everybody. And to the very special speaker, I welcome you too, darling. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry everyone. Thank you so much, Auntie Faye. It's a great privilege for us to be here on your country. So the next delightful thing that I have to do is to introduce Andrew Fairley, who's then going to introduce our wonderful guest speaker. So Andrew is the great nephew of Sir Andrew Fairley and has been chair of the Sir Andrew and Lady Fairley Foundation for over 20 years. Andrew and his co-trustees, many of whom are here tonight, have continued the work and the philosophy of the first Sir Andrew to use philanthropy to make Greater Shepparton a vibrant, safer, more tolerant and livable society through the creation of innovative partnerships. Some examples. The Foundation's played a key role in seeding important social initiatives in Shepparton, including the Lighthouse Project. It makes a significant contribution annually to underwrite the Greater Shepparton Foundation, and much of its other support is provided to enhance arts and culture in our community, not least of which a significant contribution to the fabulous new Shepparton Art Museum. Andrew is supported by a Deputy Chair, Carmel Johnson, who's also here, wonderful, and a committed group of family and independent trustees, and you are all very welcome here tonight. When he's not doing all of that, Andrew practices as an equity lawyer in Melbourne, is an expert in superannuation and financial services sector. He's a director of the Australian Financial Complaints Authority and of Qualitas Securities. He's had a long association with the philanthropic sector, former chair of the Foundation for Alcohol Research and Education, and is deputy chair of the Mornington Peninsula Foundation. There's a long family tradition of the fruit industry, you won't be surprised to know, and he carries that on as a commercial cherry grower in the Yarra Valley. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Fairley. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and what a pleasure it is to be here and actually be here in person in the moment, as opposed to what we've been enduring over the last couple of years. They've been trying in so many ways, in the sense that we haven't been able to gather in large groups to celebrate our friendships, our communities and our values, and so it's really special to see all of you here and not be doing this on the silver screen on Zoom yet again. Auntie Faye, thank you so much for your welcome. It's very special to have you here and to be able to celebrate the continuing connection to country of and culture of the Yorta Yorta people, and so we pay our respects and acknowledge that. Thank you so much. And I particularly want to pay respects to the First Nations people of Shepparton and my good friend Paul Briggs and other elders from Yorta Yorta tonight, who's been such an incredible inspiration in Shepparton for so long in so many different ways, including, of course, as Rumba is such a critical part of what Paul has achieved. So, Paul, you're amazing. Our speaker, Tanya, travelled tonight from South Australia to give this lecture, and we're incredibly appreciative of Tanya having done that. She's a recognised leader in so many areas of First Nations advocacy and beyond, and we as a community are fortunate to have her skills and her advocacy knowledge to be able to share with us in what she's going to be, it's not on the screen anymore, what she's going to be talking about in her presentation tonight of community relations of substance. I want to acknowledge the acting Vice-Chancellor of La Trobe, Professor Sue Dodds, who's taking the role instead of John Dewar, who's an apology tonight. John's overseas, but he sends his best wishes and apologises for not being able to be here, but has a very solid referee for him, a proxy for him in Sue. And also to acknowledge other members of the La Trobe University community. We have some other distinguished guests, and I particularly want to welcome Sam Birrell, the new member for Nichols, named after Sir Douglas Nichols, one of the great First Nations people from the Goulburn Valley. Matt Jackson, who is the CEO of Parks Victoria, with whom I've worked over many years. Matt, I know you have a great interest in the Goulburn Valley and Shepparton and the parks up here and Indigenous issues, so welcome. Great that you made the time to come. And also Melinda Martin, who has just joined us 8 days ago, I'm told, as our new CEO at SAM. And when we went through SAM today, I mean, what an amazing place that is. But we started asking questions. She said, hold on, I've been here 8 days, which is... So we'll look forward to having those questions answered in a few months' time. Let me also welcome the trustees of the Fairley Foundation, who are so significant in terms of their ongoing commitment to the work that we do. This lecture was conceived in 2011 to celebrate the achievements and the leadership and to understand the possibilities that exist within regional Australia through social change. We initiated it in Shepparton for two reasons. The first was that we had such an outstanding partner here to be able to initiate the lecture with in La Trobe University. It has made and continues to make such a significant commitment to Shepparton, both educationally and economically. The second reason was to reinforce the approach that the trustees of the Fairley Foundation take to philanthropy, which is to pursue proactively the advancement of social and cultural outcomes in Greater Shepparton. We felt at the time that it was important to take this opportunity annually to celebrate the heritage of regional Australia, but to also aspire to the creation of a stronger, more tolerant, more inclusive society in regional Australia, providing opportunities for all. The approach of the Fairley Foundation has been to implement the wishes and values of our founder, and Elizabeth referred to him before, Sir Andrew Fairley, who made a massive contribution to Shepparton and to Australia through the canned fruit industry. But he was committed to a more just and equitable society, but we also wanted he also, in his work, wanted to ensure that we understood and acknowledged and recognised the importance of cross-cultural integration and respect. Historically, the Foundation has been involved in projects that ameliorate social disadvantage, but with the creation of the Greater Shepparton Foundation, as Elizabeth said, we've really moved away from that. We contribute to it significantly each year, but we've moved to a much different philanthropic endeavours, and we're now mainly engaged in early intervention education, promoting cultural engagement, supporting cultural institutions, and aiding leadership to promote our cultural aspirations in this community. We've been privileged to play a role in the development of SAM, both financially and proactively as being on various boards. And that building and its existence is having and will continue to have a significant impact on the recognition of Shepparton as a centre of cultural excellence. And I think John Head is here. John, lovely to see you. John is the chair of the SAM Foundation and has done a really creditable job in ensuring that the philanthropic aspect of what was needed to build that building has been raised. We hope to build on that brand, that culture brand, in the future in order to harness the extraordinary breadth of talent and endeavour in the arts in this city and in the area. And we want to give our commitment to the really great initiative of the City of Greater Shepparton in their Creative City strategy, and we want to play a role in the design and the implementation of that. Let me make some comments about La Trobe and our partnership. This university is really an anchor to the academic and creative aspirations of the Goulburn Valley. It has incredible experience in operating regional campuses successfully and integrating its academic and cultural capabilities into a willing and talented regional community. You've probably heard me, if you've been at these lectures before, you've heard me speak about the importance of the creative class in our society. The people who are the innovators and the creative thinkers, the scientists, the professors, the novelists, artists, musicians, designers, and thought leaders from different cultural backgrounds. They only prosper in communities where there are higher places of learning, such as La Trobe. And that's an incredibly important element in us being able to ensure that that creative city environment, that creative city plan that the council has, will actually work. Let me now introduce our speaker. We are privileged to have Tanya with us tonight. Some of the details of her career were sent out to you in the material, the invitation that was provided, and her involvement in various elements of her background, both in First Nations work and in the broader community organisations. And they have been extensive. Tanya is currently the General Manager of Inclusion and Social Policy at the AFL, and she's been in that role since 2016. And she was largely responsible for securing the apology from the AFL to Adam Goodes for cultural vilification and for implementing policies that ensure that that behaviour will never be replicated. She's been a key contributor to the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples that has been has been the campaign director of the Recognise campaign, which supports recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Australian Constitution. She's had many other diverse educational and corporate roles, including being a council member of the Australian National University in Canberra, a board member of the Australian Film, Television and Radio School, a board member of the BHP Forum of Corporate Responsibility, and a board member of Bangarra Dance. Until recently, I was the chair of the Foundation for Alcohol Research and Education, as Elizabeth said. And Tanya joined our board at FAIR in 2020. I've thus been privy to the insights and intuition that Tanya brings to a board table, which both specifically and generically, I can attest to the depth and the breadth of her skills. In recognition of her acumen and the extent and reach of her capabilities to be able to see and do what is not evident to us other mere mortals, Tanya was named as the 2021 South Australian of the Year, which is an incredible honour and I think just amazing. I mean, fantastic. So it is an extraordinary privilege for me to be able to introduce Tanya to you to give the 11th Fairley La Trobe lecture here in Shepparton, the lecture on Community Relations of Substance. Tanya Hosh.
Good evening. Andrew, thanks for making me sound so awesome. I've got some of my teammates in the room and they're rolling their eyes, I just know it. That's why she's not at our meetings, because she's doing all those other ones. We've already had quite a few speeches, haven't we? So, you know, I could just yarn if you want. I have written some words, but I could just, you know, just riff. Thank you for that very generous welcome to country. It's very special, and I think it's a wonderful thing that we're getting so familiar with hearing a welcome to country, but it's not something that we should take lightly and get glib about. I think it's something to reflect on. And whenever I have to prepare a written speech, and I can tell you I don't do too many of these, I usually like to wing it, do casual Q&As. That's more my style, my speed. So Andrew, you definitely owe me a box of cherries. I just want to get that on the record before the speech, in case you don't like it. But it is, when I'm preparing, I do like to give some real thought to what it means to be welcome to someone else's country. And it is special, and the Yorta Yorta are people who have made a significant contribution, not just to this region, but to the nation, through the leadership that still, to this day, comes from Yorta Yorta country. So let me begin by recognising the traditional owners, the mighty Yorta Yorta. I recognise them knowing that they have been failed and have not been appropriately recognised under law. I recognise them for their resistance, leadership and resilience. I recognise the many Yorta Yorta who have made not just this region but this country better. I acknowledge the Yorta Yorta have never surrendered and never let their culture slide, and that is an important part of the story of this region. I also wish to acknowledge Auntie Pam Pedersen, who is a proud Yorta Yorta woman who carries the legacy of her mother and father, Sir Doug and Gladys Nichols, and brings their spirit and commitment to a reconciled nation to all she does, as she selflessly serves her community and the country. I recognise Andrew Fairley, who convinced me to say yes to this, who has a genuine heart for this region and its people, understanding that his family, wealth and privilege brings with it great responsibility. I'm only early in my friendship with Andrew and am grateful for the opportunity to be given the chance to bring my voice here tonight. Thank you. And of course I recognise Paul Briggs, a mentor to me for more years than I think either of us care to remember. Has to be at least 20 years, Paul, probably longer. And I was inspired by Paul before I even knew him. Paul plucked me from utter obscurity and stewarded me into opportunities that have led me down amazing roads and into amazing experiences. Paul has always been a guide, has challenged me to understand the history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander struggles, vision and innovation. Paul has never ceased to be clear with me about the act of dispossession and ongoing grief and trauma related to that. He has always been clear through his work about the right of Aboriginal people to our share of the economy. And now I will attempt to introduce myself beyond the bio. I'm a Torres Strait Islander woman on my father's side and Welsh on my mother's side. Can't sing. Amazing, right? However, born on Kaurna country in Adelaide, where I still live today, when I was 3 weeks old, I was adopted into a family with an Aboriginal father, a Darug man from New South Wales, and a white mother. I've struggled with that, all that means, navigating my road to peace with my identity. One of the things I'm most grateful for in my life, other than my amazing daughter and the privilege of being a mother myself, is the incredible love, security and joy of my childhood and my family. Not being brought up in my culture is a loss, but I also gained so much and I have no regrets about that. I consider myself lucky and privileged. My late parents are never far from my thoughts, and they both taught me to be my authentic self. I always try to be, having learnt some time ago, to be anything else does not serve me or anyone. This is not to say that there are not roles I sometimes need to play. We all do. But I feel my strongest, most effective and confident when I am just me. Even my 14-year-old daughter Marley tells me, "Mum, is that what you're wearing? Well, you be you." Tonight, with this privileged opportunity to share my thoughts and perspectives, I want to speak about relationships as substance. Some of you may be expecting me to speak about what is special about this region and Greater Shepparton, but if you're here tonight, I'm confident that you've nailed that already. So I want to speak about relationships that make communities stronger, and if neglected, further disenfranchise and further reduce the empowerment of those who have been discriminated against and marginalised the most. The public discourse in Australia frequently speaks about and analyses our societal weaknesses and challenges and purports to know the answers to many of these things. And yet, despite this, we remain captured and separated by our power and privilege, or lack thereof. We don't spend time speaking of privilege and class and power. And yet it is all around us, everywhere, every day, all the time. It is easy to look to those higher on the continuum of privilege than ourselves as the haves, rather than acknowledging our own relative privilege and status. It's uncomfortable to speak about, and when we do, it inevitably leads to having to ask ourselves the question about how we engage our power and privilege and how we consider our mutual responsibility to one another. So let's just reflect on many significant leadership acts from Yorta Yorta giant William Cooper. We have just recently celebrated NAIDOC Week, and yet many in the broader public know next to nothing of its origins. William Cooper is perhaps best known for his leadership he provided in holding an Aboriginal Day of Mourning on the 26th of January 1938. This date coincided with the 150th anniversary of the landing of the First Fleet and has successfully raised awareness of what this meant for the Indigenous population and the loss from that time and the subsequent loss that continues today. So, as time has shown, the significance of the date of Australia Day and changing that date is not a new construct. The day then evolved into National Aborigines Day or Aboriginal Sunday, which was first observed in 1940 on the weekend before Australia Day. And today the celebrations of NAIDOC Week have their origin in Cooper's original day of remembrance. Was William Cooper graced with structural status or powers or rights that made a runway for his moral authority and leadership? I don't think so. But it is clear he felt he must do something, and he did. If someone in William Cooper's position, with his wisdom, strength and determination, could take the risk of standing for what is right rather than what was popular, for more than just the benefit of himself, what can those with privilege, wealth, power and status do in 2022? Answering that question and acting upon it is a critical part of building relationships of substance. Now, if you follow Australian rules football, anyone? Like, seriously, anyone? There's no hands. Yeah, otherwise I'm telling Gil. So if you do follow Aussie rules football, you probably know who Sir Douglas Nicholls is, but he should have been known across Australia regardless. I wonder how many in this room tonight learnt about Sir Doug at school growing up. Such is the reach, accomplishments, determination of Sir Doug Nicholls, an Aboriginal leader, again from this region, that 2 weeks of footy are celebrated in his honour, and now highlight the contributions of other great and good Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander players of the game, but also those who bring leadership for the good of others off the field. There was no great status for an Aboriginal footy player in those days that Sir Doug played. In fact, it has only been in quite recent years his former club of Carlton have given recognition to their shameful treatment of an Aboriginal player, activist, governor and pastor, and how important it is that a football club recognise their privilege and status and responsibility to take these steps towards some degree of restoration. It is these acts of restoration that are fundamental to building relationships of substance. It is easier and more convenient to embrace the warm nostalgia of the past and the positive and uplifting parts of those stories. It's less convenient to reflect upon the shame and ongoing impact of the past. As it has often been said, we are only doomed to be defined by the past if we fail to determine and act on building a new and equitable future. It is this concept of truth-telling that has become so powerful that can help us build relationships of substance. It has always been a curiosity to me that we don't bring the same emotional acumen to our social community relationships as we do to our interpersonal relationships. Unless you're completely useless at relationships, and if you are, then maybe don't do that. But basic principles of commitment, care, fairness, respect, reciprocity and generosity are all traits that help make relationships work. However, the principle of equity is critical in this. One of my favourite quotes is by Harvard professor Cesar Cruz, who said of art, "We should disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed." I believe this is also a strong guiding principle in work towards rights, justice and equity. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have lived through and still live with remarkable levels of disturbance. Disturbance to our cultures, our way of life, our lands and waters, our traditional systems, and the ongoing eradication of our rights and lack of recognition of our unique status as the first peoples of this continent. We have become, as a society, so good at othering, we can fail to examine our own responsibility to act with the expendable risk and courage afforded to us through our privilege, as relative as that may be. Relationships of substance cannot thrive and grow if we separate ourselves from one another through a lack of willingness to self-examine our privilege, opportunity and responsibility to act accordingly. As a nation, recently we elected a new federal government, and we have every reason to hope we will indeed have a moment to put our respective leadership, power and responsibility together to vote in an important referendum to recognise in our highest legal document the First Peoples of Australia. A document that currently recognises Queen Victoria, coinage and lighthouses, but remains to this day silent on the existence of the place of us as First Peoples. This moment calls on each of us to act. Referenda are not easily won, especially in Australia, and we cannot assume that others will cover us and do the heavy lifting to ensure that the double majority test required to secure a successful referendum of this most basic and modest of proposals. An important consideration here is how will the greater region of Shepparton vote? Will Shepparton be one of the regions that comes together with a sense of shared purpose as part of this important restoration I spoke of earlier, with voting a result to be proud of? Or will it produce a result that is long remembered for a low voter support by those millions of Australians who we know will already vote yes? If we do not secure this overwhelming yes vote, the implications for restoration are significant. This alone does not do all the work that must be done, but it is an indicator of the national will to work towards getting serious about the injustices of the past. Relationships of substance will be reflected in the leadership of each of us towards this nation-building effort. And let's not be prepared to settle for this alone. Since colonisation, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have remained steadfast and clear. We need our rights recognised and realised in practice. Adjunct Associate Professor Mary Graham, a magnificent Aboriginal leader and philosopher from Queensland, reminded us in her article in The Conversation in January this year in relation to treaty work around the country. She wrote that developing meaningful treaties with First Nations peoples requires at least partly remedying the dominance of white Australian political forms and power. If this is not done, it is not possible to negotiate political authority of First Nations peoples and Australian governments and the power relations between them. Let's remember, as part of the Uluru Statement, the Makarrata Commission is about ensuring framework development to protect and ensure fair and just standards in agreement making. And after all, despite the fear-mongering that often accompanies the word treaty, a treaty is simply an agreement. Without relationships of substance and without heeding the well-articulated caution of Mary Graham, we will remain stuck and separated without mutual understanding of one another, which means more loss and more disturbance for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Is that something we're really willing to risk? The opportunity for this region to stand apart with determination to navigate these opportunities strongly and successfully is large. There is no reason the Greater Shepparton region cannot set the pace in this work to move beyond conflict into empowering collaborations that rightly supports the strength of First Peoples. Relationships of substance require an investment to listen, learn, understand and lead the change rather than looking the other way, thinking charity is enough instead of partnership leveraging your relative privilege. In the leadership and decision-making tables and roles you operate in, are Yorta people seated around those tables too? And if not, why not? Without that connection of working alongside each other, how will relationships build and strengthen? And how will impactful and just change come? In closing, I want to share another quote that comes to my mind most days. And given I cannot articulate this any better, I share this by African-American writer and intellect James Baldwin. In any case, it is power allied with ignorance that is the most ferocious enemy of justice. There is no need for ignorance and no need for us to be separated by ignorance and untruths. We can achieve relationships of substance that make the whole community stronger, safer, more equal, more just and more inclusive. If only we invest in these relationships emotionally, economically, structurally and politically. Thank you.
So Tanya's very kindly agreed to answer any questions that you have of her. So if you wanted to delve into the depths of the AFL's approach to various issues or any of the really weighty matters that she's dealt with tonight, please put your hand up and let's have a question. Perhaps I could ask the first. I remember on one occasion you were in a board meeting at Fair and you then had to keep running out and back, and at the end of it, I said, what's going on? And you said, Andrew, you have to understand racism never sleeps. Can you tell us a little bit about how there's been a change at the AFL as a result from 2016 and the work that you've done to enable that apology and also to empower people to know that it's not okay?
Yeah, thanks. That's a welcome question. I mean, obviously it is the work of me and many, many other people across the whole sector. When I arrived at the AFL, it wasn't that long after the Adam Goodes betrayal, is one way I would put it, and there was almost a bit of a paralysation to talk about it. Not just what happened to Adam, but racism in general. There were still debates about the role that racism played. And my view was, and it has been adopted, if racism is a topic of conversation, we talk about it more, not less. If racism is on the front page of the paper, I say good, because it happens all over the country every single day. Now, there's nothing to celebrate about racism in our game, but it is there. And of course it is, because we're part of the country and there's racism across the country. And you can't solve a problem you don't talk about. And what we have to do is be prepared to think about the role that we each have to play. And when you have the footprint across the country that the AFL is privileged to have, then our responsibility is even greater to help the nation have more constructive conversations about racism and its impact. Very fortunate to be advised by people like Paul Briggs and other people, including my team who are here tonight, in terms of what we must do in practice and to never, ever, ever give up.
Great. Other questions?
Yes. How would you approach, if you talk about ignorance, and yes, there's ignorance if people haven't been educated with the proper history, but how do you tackle when some people choose to be ignorant because they've got 5 or 6 generations, and to admit that certain things happened on the family farm would sort of destroy all their, whether it's power of who they are in the area that they live in, or what they believed in, and to find out that, hey, granddad, great-granddad, they weren't so great. So how do you, so there's the ignorance of not having, knowing, but then there's also the fear of actually admitting to it and overcoming that. I see that as a huge, that's something we've really got to work on, because I think some people don't want to know because I think they're really scared of the past.
Despite my own reactions to racist treatment towards me or someone I love, or the emotional reaction I might have from time to time seeing it done to others, even from a distance, one of the things that I have learnt is that humanity is powerful, and it's important to live up to our own standards, not down to other people's. And so it might be challenging, but I actually do have empathy for people who've lived through a certain construct and certain set of beliefs and their own truths. Because to deny someone else's truth doesn't actually advance your own. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be challenged. But I think we have to have empathy about those conversations. And people have to be ready for those conversations. And there will always be people who don't want to look at that. And I don't think there's very much you can do if that's the case. But that's why I keep saying, let's talk about it more, not less. And if we invest in relationships of substance, then it's much easier to have those fierce and tough conversations that are challenging, that are uncomfortable, that can take people time to process. Racism is never okay. We can't change history, but we can improve the future. I think an important part of that is looking at the reality of the history. But I also think it's okay to create the right sort of environments where people feel safe to do that, because it is scary, it is hard, we're all human, we all have emotions, but again, that's why the relationships of substance are important, because it's either going to be a safe environment to have those conversations or it won't be, and then they won't be had.
Those conversations are hard to have with children playing in a thing that they're playing with it, but they're also reading about it. So do you see whether we can do more with the art?
Yeah, absolutely.
Interactive.
Yeah, plays, drama, writing.
Because sometimes words are too hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, with all art, there's a story. I mean, you wouldn't want to trust me to string a line of dots together, but, you know, I have such admiration for artists, because one of the things that I have learned is they are bringing something very deep and intimate forward for us to appreciate and understand. And so I think the example you're sharing is a really powerful one. And just imagine what could be achieved in this region to look at a collaborative piece of art that tells the true history.
Jane Freeman.
Thank you, Tanya. It was just wonderful. Some years ago, I think it was back in late 2010 or 11, I approached you and said, could you help me to get some young people, asked you first to come and talk to the students at Auburn College about what reconciliation actually was. And it was a time we were talking about the referendum early back then. And you said, no, I'm not going to come. I'm going to send some young people. So we had the most extraordinary debate with young people from your team who came, and the comment that amazed me was that so many of these young people, a junior common room full of people, had no idea, had absolutely no idea what reconciliation was or what the referendum was. So fast forward into 2022, and this most incredibly important question that is going to be posed to our community, probably the last chance we're going to have to get this right. How do we get the hearts and minds of young people? Now, one of your comments before was about all the other ways we could, but what is happening? What is the work that's being done behind to get the hearts and minds, particularly the young people, to go out there and actually say, this is not right. We need to do something about it, and we need to make sure that if this comes to a referendum, we vote yes.
Yep, absolutely. Look, there is a lot of work that has been going on for a very, very long time in relation to this conversation, and you do get referendum fatigue. I can vouch for that. But we do have one of the hardest referendum constitutions in the world to change, and you know, that double majority test is massive. So it's the majority of people across the country and then the majority of people in the majority of states. So if you lose a few states, we don't get a pass. And so if you're running the no case, you're only trying to knock over a couple of states really, by comparison to the test. But that's, you know, I can live with that, because you shouldn't mess about with the Constitution on a whim. The work on this is for all of us. That's the real answer. It is for young people, it's for old people, it's for everyone in between. It means reaching every person, and not just of voting age, but people who will speak to those people of voting age. And essentially, I think there's going to be a lot of noise, and that's part of the democratic process. And I'm also not fussed by that either. But let's be really, really clear about the facts. The highest legal document in this country does not recognise the First Peoples, and yet still has the power to discriminate against us. And it can be changed. We can do something about that. We have to vote yes. And the question will end up being quite simple. Do you believe, and I haven't drafted the question or anything, although I know the people that are, and I'm sort of hoping for the best, but it will end up being a simple question about a simple fact. Do you think the Constitution should recognise the First Peoples of this country? And I can tell you, if you look at the Uluru Statement and you look at all of the elements of it, it is an incredibly modest proposal. And if I was someone who was a bit concerned of 3% of the population taking over the country, I would grab this and run, and I'd get it done. Because this is nothing to be fearful of. It is a nation-building opportunity for us, and everyone has to do something. Everyone in this room has to do something. It won't just be on the shoulders of young people, but they will be the ones that carry the legacy of what we as a nation do when it comes to that vote.
Hi, Alice Miller. We know that kind of change to occur truly is across all levels within society. After leaving here tonight, what can I as an individual do as a collective group? What could we do potentially first thing tomorrow morning to start this kind of forward step?
I think it's important to gather together with the people that you trust and have a conversation about what you could do collectively and look for other groups to join with. That would be pretty powerful. I reckon there's a lot of important business that gets done around kitchen tables, and don't discount the power of that. It might feel like you're not doing anything. Maybe what you do is get together and say, we're going to sit down and read this Uluru Statement. And then we're going to go online and sign up to one of the campaigns that are supporting it so that we stay informed. And then we're going to start connecting with the local Aboriginal community in the ways that we can and start building relationships and see how we work together. The most successful referendum in our history was 1967. And, almost 91% of Australians voted yes. We could do that again. And that was only possible because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and other Australians work together. You are the majority, and so you've got to carry more than we should, and we just don't have time to talk to everyone. We're flat out just keeping up with each other, and we're pretty good. I always like to say that blackfellas invented Facebook before there was Facebook, so we're pretty good. But it really is about building relationships with your own posse and working out how to connect with others. And the reason that I say that is because it's much less scary as a small group who rocks up and, I don't know, Paul, if this is good or not, but, go out to Rumba and buy food and support the team. Go and build relationships through sporting clubs. Of any organisation you're part of, make sure that there's an Aboriginal person on that board or committee. Make sure there are Aboriginal people in decision-making roles and find out why there's not. And then, start asking those questions and pondering that because all of those things matter. Having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in decision-making roles makes a huge difference because it influences the way that you will think. Because suddenly you've got access to a perspective that you didn't have before when you're making decisions that actually impact everyone in your community. It's not that hard. I mean, look, he got me on a board around alcohol research and education, right? Now, I'm not saying I was an alcoholic, but, it wasn't a natural fit to start with.
She does a great job.
Tanya, I love the positivity of your message and your reference to the 1967 referendum. It was a very positive campaign, for taking the nation forward. On Monday we had 70 kids from Shepparton in the parliamentary chamber, and a 16-year-old girl from Shep High stood up and said, "I'm an angry optimist," and she gave 5 points, including the issues you've talked about. And then ended by saying that it'll be okay because I believe in people. Very similar to Zelensky, who was asked the same question about Ukraine. So where do you draw your optimism and positivity from, in helping us to deliver the message and taking the message to our kitchen tables, to our boardrooms?
Look, I'm typically glass is half empty. That's the truth. I am. But when it comes to conversations like this, I don't think that I have the right to indulge myself if I'm going to stand up in front of a room full of people and ask for change. That's it. So I don't think people feel optimistic about making change happen, change that's worthwhile and meaningful happen, if you're negative about it. I think there's some basic truths about how we learn and what motivates us, and I think it's my job to always be constructive. I spend the majority of my time as one of the few women in the room, as one of the few or only Indigenous person in the room, and if I just took on the posture of indulging my emotions, which still boil over from time to time, but if I just indulged in that, then I know that I can't really contribute anything to change. Now, it doesn't mean I don't get together with my trusted peers and, rant and bitch and moan and pull my hair out and get frustrated and cry about the huge injustices, the racism, the suicides, the early death rates. Of course I do. The deaths in custody that are still happening, the fact that we lock up 10-year-old children in this country, that in grade 4, 10 years old, you can be picked up, put in the back of a police wagon and strip searched in a police cell. That has such a traumatic impact that it impacts brain development, and then the cycle continues. We can do something about that. So yeah, don't get me started on the negative stuff. Sorry. But I think we all owe it to ourselves and each other to use our privilege, our leadership position to be constructive and try and help facilitate a willingness to act.
One last question.
It's a bit personal. Cyril Rioli sort of just disappeared, and I've wondered if that was because of racism or was it because he just got homesick or whatever, because we lost one of our best players. I'll be grateful. You don't have to give away.
And just when I thought I was getting out without a footy question, look, I can't speak for Cyril and I wouldn't dare, but, it's been pretty well covered in the media. I think we ought all be concerned, the Aussie Rules is a great game, it's exciting, you see black excellence every week, I love it. I'm really glad I'm doing this in Victoria, not New South Wales at the moment, because in some other places I visit, it's not quite effusive around Aussie Rules. But I think we have to just appreciate the toll on any person to have so much profile, to have so much attention, to be so far away from home, to be so far removed from your culture on a daily basis and from family, who are still expecting you to meet your cultural obligations and demands, who need a loan, who have their struggles, and feeling potentially bereft because you can't be there. I think we all know what it's like not to be able to be there for someone who needs something that someone we care about. It's horrible. And then to think about doing all of that under that huge amount of attention, still experiencing racism from time to time, there'd be no question, and then the highly disciplined world of elite sport. And, he was amazing, brilliant, could have played on brilliantly. Are you a Hawks supporter? Yeah. for many years, I'm sure. But gee, we're lucky we had him for the time we did. And I think, you know, with all of the cultural diversity coming into the game, you know, it costs. And I think any elite athlete, whatever their sport, pays a high price for dedicating so much into such a sort of, you know, disciplined, narrow space that at some point you have to say enough. And, you know, I wish him all the best, and I hope he is well and happy and whatever happens for him in the future. But gee, I'm glad that we had him, and I can only imagine the number of Aboriginal kids that play footy because they saw Cyril.
Will you thank Tanya for her... the Acting Vice-Chancellor of La Trobe, Professor Sue Dodds, to come up and propose a vote of thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. And although she's gone, I'd also like to thank Auntie Faye for her generous welcome to country, and to also recognise and pay my respects to the Yorta Nations, and to recognise their continuous connection to this community, and would also like to extend my respects and pay my respects to the elders, to the various First Nations people who are with us tonight. It's fantastic to have so many people from the community with us, and it's fantastic to have all of you here. The Fairley La Trobe Lecture has been one of the great annual events in Shepparton, and the university is extremely proud to partner with the Fairley Foundation in presenting it. It's been wonderful to hear from someone who's playing such an important national leadership role in helping all of us to better understand and respect Indigenous history, culture, and achievements, and to value the role of Indigenous peoples in shaping our nation, and our responsibility as non-Indigenous people in recognising that history, that culture, and our responsibility for addressing the future. But especially looking at this in rural and regional Australia and in the towns like Shepparton. All Australians have a responsibility to stand beside people like Tanya to support and implement positive change for Indigenous people and communities. This is important for all of our futures. I know that Tanya is one of the eminent Indigenous elders I've just added things, try that again. Indigenous leaders, who's pursuing constitutional recognition of Australia's First Nations people. And I'd like to reaffirm tonight, La Trobe University stands with you in supporting the objectives of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, including creating a First Nations voice in the Australian Parliament enshrined in the Constitution. This is just one small step for addressing a major inequity within this country. And it's an opportunity to forge a stronger, deeper, and more meaningful relationship into the future, a fairer world that we can live in. So I encourage everyone here tonight to be part of this historic process. As a university, La Trobe recognises it has a privilege and a responsibility to forge a space for those conversations, to listen to the uncomfortable truths, and to address practical change. As Tanya said, Indigenous people have shaped rural and regional Australia over many thousands of years. You didn't say that bit, somebody else said that for me. But certainly Tanya drew attention to the role of important Indigenous players in supporting this nation. If we can elevate and respect the role of Indigenous people and the role that those people continue to play, all of us will benefit. Thinking about Tanya's talk, she talked about, the relationships of substance. These are not just transactional relationships, these are deep relationships, these are relationships of understanding, relationships that have an emotional, an economic, and a substantial impact on the lives of everyone involved. She drew our attention to the idea that these relationships of substance are the ones that form strong communities when they're fostered well, and if they're ignored, continue practices and processes of alienation and disadvantage. She talked about power, class and privilege. As a political philosopher, I loved being in a room where people are comfortable saying power, class, and privilege out loud. They're taking the risk of standing up for what you know is right. And talked about the ideas of relationships founded on respect, reciprocity, equity, and understanding. And it seems to me that for any polity to come together on a just foundation, there needs to be appropriate recognition of respect, recognition, and negotiation. Negotiation requires listening, really, really listening. Historical injustices have lasting impacts on generations, and we have an opportunity now to try to start to move to address those injustices. So we were encouraged to think about partnership and privilege and the responsibility that comes from the privilege that we hold. So I'd like to ask you all to join me in thanking Tanya one more time for her fantastic presentation. I have some more people to thank. I'd like to thank Andrew Fairley and the Board of the Trustees of the Fairley Foundation for being such wonderful partners with La Trobe and for the important work that you all do for Greater Shepparton. To Elizabeth Kapp, the head of the Shepparton campus, for her energy, support, her fantastic ambassadorship on behalf of the university and making sure that everything La Trobe does in Shepparton is done fantastically. So thank you very much. Vanessa Parry from the Fairley Foundation and Therese Thomas from La Trobe's Shepparton campus have been the people who actually made sure that we all got here. There were chairs and we knew what was happening. Those kinds of things take no small amount of organization, which can be more challenging when working across two organizations and across various places. So thank you to Vanessa and Therese. You've done a fantastic job tonight. And before I finish, I would be remiss of me not to plug another great La Trobe public event that's happening tomorrow night, and you don't have to leave your home in order to attend it. This is part of our Ideas in Society series. You can join the event online. It's a discussion with Australia's leading experts about the terrible war happening in Ukraine. If you're interested, go to the La Trobe website and search for Ideas and Society to sign up and watch back at a later date or to watch tomorrow night. But I really do think one of the fantastic things about being part of a university culture and community is being able to hear from great minds. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you for supporting both the Fairley Lecture and La Trobe, and we hope to see you back in 2023. And pleased to thank Tanya for delivering the La Trobe Fairley Lecture and to offer a small token from La Trobe.